I never expected moving a sofa to feel like this. The moment I stepped into her apartment, there she was, standing in the sunlight that spilled across the living room, a graceful silhouette framed by half-open curtains. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, and for an instant, the world shrank to just us. She was captivating, not in the flashy, magazine cover way that makes people stop in their tracks. No, it was subtler than that. Her confidence was quiet, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you want, but there was something else, too. Something vulnerable, just beneath the surface. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of the table before she pulled them back, the tiny pause before she spoke, as if she was measuring the weight of each word. "I've got the couch," she said, tilting her head slightly, the light catching the soft lines around her eyes. "But could you help me with the other side?" I nodded, stepping closer, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were. Her scent drifted over me, something warm, faintly floral, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I tried to focus on the task, my hands on the smooth fabric of the sofa, but every time our hands brushed, a jolt of awareness ran through me. It wasn't just accidental. At least I don't think it was. "You're stronger than you look," she said, half smiling, and there was that subtle vulnerability again, just enough to pull me in. I laughed softly, almost nervously, and said, "I've had practice. Moving furniture, or hearts." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, sharp and playful, but there was an unspoken pause between us. Not silence exactly, it was charged. You could feel in the room, hovering in the space our shoulders almost touched. I could see the flicker of hesitation, the tiny tilt of her head, the way her lips parted as if to say something she didn't quite dare. When we shifted the couch together, I stayed a little too close. I watched the way her fingers gripped the fabric, how the soft line of her neck curved toward me when she bent down. A small laugh escaped her, and without thinking, I said, "Careful, you're going to crush me," with that smile. Her laugh softened, and she didn't move away. Instead, she let her hand brush against mine again. It was brief, almost accidental, but it left a heat that lingered longer than it should have. I felt the blood rush to my ears and the weight of her gaze pressing against mine, silently daring me to say something, do something, anything. And then she said it, just like that, casual and sharp. "Now move closer." My chest tightened, heart thudding like I'd just run a mile. The words hung between us, teasing impossible to ignore. I didn't dare move. Yet, somehow, standing there, shoulder to shoulder, I could feel her nearness in a way that made every thought scatter. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Startled, we both turned, the sudden intrusion breaking the spell, but the tension didn't leave. She shot me a look, quick and fleeting, a mixture of amusement and challenge. My fingers itched to brush hers again, but the moment was paused, suspended, unresolved. I stood there, heart still racing, and for the first time, I realized moving furniture wasn't what I'd remembered. It was something else entirely. Something dangerously, deliciously magnetic. And now, the question that neither of us dared to speak: what happens next? The knock at the door lingered in my ears long after she had opened it. A delivery person, just a small box, and yet the normalcy of it somehow made the air between us feel heavier, charged with everything unsaid. When the door closed again, she leaned against the frame, arms crossed, and I realized how small gestures carried more weight than words. "I don't usually ask for help," she said, voice soft, almost like she was admitting something dangerous. "I've moved enough furniture alone to know I can manage. But you—" Her gaze flicked to me, a teasing edge underneath something more vulnerable. "There's a difference." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how aware I was of her. The curve of her neck, the way her hair fell just over her collarbone, the slight tremor in her fingers when she adjusted the box on the counter. I wanted to reach out to brush it back, but I held myself back. Every instinct screamed yes, but decorum, caution, and an invisible line drawn by years and expectation kept me rooted. "You always carry things for people?" I asked, attempting lightness. Her laugh was soft, but it trembled like a sigh held too long. No, not usually. I prefer doing things myself. Independence has its advantages. She glanced away, and I caught the faint shadow behind her eyes, memory she wasn't ready to voice. The lines around her mouth softened for just a moment, and I thought I glimpsed a life full of choices made alone. I wanted to ask her more, to probe gently, but instead I just watched, observing the subtle ways she moved, the way her shoulders tensed and relaxed, as if in constant negotiation with herself. It was magnetic, frustrating, and entirely consuming. "You're staring," she said suddenly, her voice playful, yet with an edge. She stepped closer, close enough that her arm brushed mine. The contact was minimal, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a pulse straight through me. My chest tightened, words evaporating somewhere between desire and restraint. "I wasn't," I muttered, though my voice betrayed me. "You were," she said, tilting her head. And then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped back, a careful retreat that said she wanted more, but feared it. I could see it in the way her lips pressed together, the subtle hesitation in her eyes. There was a moment of silence, one that stretched between us with the weight of everything unspoken. I thought about the unlikelihood of it all, the age gap, the whispers I could imagine from judgmental eyes, the uncertainty of stepping into something that could easily be ruined by misstep or time. And yet, here we were, drawn to one another despite it all. I reached out, almost unconsciously, my fingers brushing against hers as she passed the box. She didn't pull away. Her hand lingered just long enough to set my pulse racing, her eyes locking on mine with a fleeting acknowledgement of the unspoken understanding between us. That touch, brief, electric, and impossibly intimate, changed everything. The room felt smaller, closer. Our proximity wasn't accidental. It was a mutual surrender to something neither of us wanted to name yet. And in that silent, charged space, I realized that whatever this was, it was already unstoppable. The quiet was broken by the sudden ping of her phone on the counter. She glanced down, just long enough for me to catch the quick furrow of her brow. A message from someone I didn't ask, didn't want to know, but the intrusion was enough to snap our proximity into sharp relief. She started, lifting the phone, hesitating. Her fingers brushed mine as she swiped it open, and I felt that familiar spark crawl up my arm. Neither of us moved away, though the air between us seemed to tremble. A laugh outside the door startled both of us. Probably a neighbor or a friend coming too early. We froze. The moment stretched impossibly long. Her breath brushed against my cheek, just a whisper of warmth and perfume. I could smell the faint trace of coffee lingering on her skin from earlier, and it made my chest tighten. Did you hear that?" I whispered, not moving. My words were useless. The tension was already too thick, and I couldn't think past the nearness of her. "I heard it," she said softly, eyes fixed on mine, her lips slightly parted as if she was about to say more, or maybe ask something she didn't dare. Her hand lingered on mine, brushing lightly, hesitant yet deliberate, and my pulse caught. I wanted to close the space between us, to feel her closer, but my mind screamed restraint. We shifted the box together, and somehow our bodies brushed, a shoulder, a hip, a hand grazing a back, and each accidental contact left a trail of heat. My mind raced, imagining what a kiss might feel like, the curve of her neck, the softness of her lips. But before it could happen, the sound of footsteps from the hall jolted us apart. Her gaze darted toward the door, wide eyes, and then back at me. There was fear there, fear of discovery, fear of crossing a line, but also something more dangerous, desire. I wanted to speak, to tell her it was okay, to reach out again, but the words stuck. Instead, I let my hand rest near hers on the box. The proximity alone was a confession, unspoken but undeniable. She started, paused, then let her words trail into silence. My heart hammered in short, erratic beats, echoing the rhythm of hers. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the world had contracted to this single charged moment. And yet, even as we tried to retreat, Even as we reminded ourselves of the impossibility of judgment, of everything that could go wrong, something compelled us closer. She shifted just enough for her body to graze mine again. I caught the faint scent of her hair as she leaned slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward me. We were closer than ever, closer than we should have been, and neither of us moved back. The electricity between us hummed, uncontainable, dangerous, and thrilling. For a moment, the room was suspended in possibility. Our faces were inches apart, our breaths mingling, hearts beating like twin warnings and invitations all at once. Neither of us dared the final step, but the tension promised it wouldn't stay this way for long. And in that breathless, almost kissed silence, I realized we were already lost, drawn together by something we could neither name nor resist. The apartment was quiet again, but it felt different now, heavier, charged, as if the air itself had grown thick with anticipation. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud enough to drown out everything else, yet attuned to every subtle sound she made. The soft shuffle of her feet, the faint catch of her breath, the delicate brush of her fingers along the edge of the counter. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I let my hand hover near hers, almost touching, trembling with the urge to close the distance. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. Her eyes flicked up, meeting mine, and something unspoken passed between us. A question, a warning, an invitation. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet. She shifted, and I felt her shoulder press briefly against mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric, impossible to ignore. "Don't," I murmured, barely audible, and somehow it was both a plea and a command. My fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear, and I could feel the warmth of her skin against my palm. She didn't pull away. She leaned slightly, just enough to make my restraint fray, to blur the line between what was allowed and what we wanted. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, floral and intimate, subtle but overwhelming in its effect. My voice dropped lower, near her ear, involuntary in its intimacy. "You don't know what you do to me." Her lips parted slightly, eyes glimmering with a mix of amusement, fear, and something deeper. For a moment, I thought she might say the same, but instead she stepped back, just a fraction, careful, teasing. The space between us felt unbearable, stretching and contracting with every shallow breath. Then came the spark that shattered all pretense, a sudden knock at the door. Not subtle, not casual, loud, demanding attention. Her eyes widened, panic flashing, and she turned just enough for me to see the fleeting vulnerability I'd been craving to touch for weeks. But before she could move fully away, I closed the gap again, my hand lingering at her waist. Her chest pressed against me lightly, almost apologetically, and I felt the tremor of her hesitation in the curve of her spine. Every instinct screamed to kiss her, to bridge the distance entirely, but decorum and caution clawed back just enough. "Are we?" I whispered, my lips dangerously close to her ear, words unfinished, suspended between desire and reason. Her breath hitched, and I could feel her answering in a way she didn't say aloud. The slight tremor of her fingers against mine, the lean of her body toward mine despite the fear. Time slowed, the apartment shrinking to this single, suspended heartbeat. Everything we had restrained, every glance, every brush of hands, every shared breath had led to this. And yet, everything still hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of the impossible. Her lips were right there. Mine were right there. And in that charged, impossibly close space, I knew one move could change everything. I had just leaned a fraction closer when her phone vibrated again, startling us both. She glanced down, eyes narrowing, and for a second I thought she was checking a harmless message, but then she froze. Her lips pressed together, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "Something I should have told you," she murmured, voice low, almost apologetic. She hesitated, then shook her head, like she was trying to decide if she could risk honesty. My pulse quickened, my hand still hovering near hers, fingers twitching with anticipation and dread. "What is it?" I asked softly, trying to sound casual, though my stomach twisted with sudden fear. She swallowed, eyes flicking away, then back to mine. "It's complicated. Someone's watching, or someone might know more than I thought." Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted a stray curtain, the motion tiny, but it made my chest tighten. I noticed every micro-movement, every hesitation, every shiver. I stepped closer instinctively, drawn to the vulnerability she didn't fully show. "Who?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. "Not a person," she admitted, taking a cautious breath. "A situation, something I've been hiding." She brushed past me to pick up a small stack of papers on the counter. Our bodies collided lightly, too close, too intimate, and yet neither of us moved apart. I could feel her warmth, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the faint metallic tang of her fear. The tension shifted. What had felt like a slow, teasing game suddenly carried weight. I wanted to reach for her, hold her close, assure her, but the risk now was real. The risk was external, but it also mirrored the vulnerability I'd been suppressing inside myself. "I didn't tell you before," she whispered, finally meeting my gaze, "because I wasn't sure, because I didn't want to hurt you or make this complicated." Her fingers brushed mine again as she handed me a paper. The contact was fleeting, but it left a spark, a reminder of everything we had been trying not to name. I felt my chest tighten as I read between the lines. The truth of her secret didn't lessen the pull I felt. If anything, it made her more impossibly magnetic. My hand itched to reach out, to brush a strand of hair from her face, to let her feel my presence fully, but restraint lingered, almost painfully. Her eyes searched mine, raw and daring. I could see the internal struggle, desire, fear, longing, and regret all tangled together. She leaned slightly toward me, just enough that the warmth of her body pressed into mine, subtle but undeniable. The sensation made my thoughts scatter. I don't know if I should say this," she whispered, voice trembling, "but I think you already feel it." I nodded, almost imperceptibly, my own voice caught somewhere between certainty and hesitation. We were suspended between confession and action, between wanting and fearing, both of us acutely aware that nothing would ever feel the same after this. And in that fragile, charged moment, we made the unspoken decision. We would face it, whatever it was, together. The apartment felt smaller than ever. Every sound, every shadow, seemed amplified, pressing us together, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to force the truth into the open. We stood just inches apart, breaths mingling, the tension between us taut enough to snap. My hand hovered near hers, unwilling to move, and yet desperate not to stay still. "I can't," she whispered, voice low, hesitant, as if the words themselves were heavy with risk. Her eyes searched mine, full of fear and longing, vulnerability and defiance all tangled together. "I know," I said, voice barely audible, my fingers twitching as though my restraint could be seen. "But neither of us can pretend anymore." She shifted slightly, and I felt the soft curve of her shoulder brush against mine. The contact was fleeting, but enough to make my pulse surge. My heart hammered in short, frantic beats as I noticed the faint quiver in her hands, the way her lips pressed together as though she was holding back something fierce. "Is it wrong?" she asked, almost a whisper, voice trembling. "To feel this way?" I shook my head, unable to speak the words that would ruin the moment. Yet every muscle in my body said yes, yes, come closer, and simultaneously warned me to stop. I could smell her perfume again, floral and grounding, sweet and impossible. The nearness of her, the heat of her presence, was dizzying. I reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing for a heartbeat before reopening. The silence stretched, loaded, every second a delicate battle between want and caution. "I've wanted this since the first day," I confessed, voice low, catching somewhere between honesty and need. I didn't know if I should. Her breath hitched, the faintest tremor running through her body as if my words had unlocked something she'd been guarding. Neither did I, she admitted. Her fingers brushed mine, a simple touch that set off a cascade of shivers. The space between us disappeared. Our shoulders pressed together, our breaths intermingled, and I realized that any hesitation was a lie we no longer needed to tell. Then, finally, the tension broke, not with a kiss, not yet, but with the surrender of our mutual acknowledgement. We stepped closer, intentionally, fear and desire intertwined. Our foreheads rested against each other, breaths mingling, and the world outside fell away. Every unspoken thought, every stolen glance, every fleeting touch coalesced into clarity. "I understand you," she whispered, voice trembling but steady. "All of it. And I understand you," I replied, my hand gently cradling her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "Everything you've held back, everything you've feared. I do." The moment hung there, raw, messy, human. No words left, no pretense, no hesitation. Just understanding, just closeness, just the undeniable pull that had been building for weeks. And for the first time, we didn't step away. We didn't hide. We simply were. The space between us dissolved, leaving only what had always been waiting. Connection, desire, and a fragile, electrifying certainty that neither of us would ever forget this moment. The apartment was quiet again, but the stillness felt different this time. Soft, warm, like the world had slowed to match the rhythm of our breathing. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, we didn't speak immediately. We just stood there, letting the proximity, the intimacy, the hard-won trust between us settle like sunlight across a room. She reached for my hand, and I took it without hesitation. Fingers intertwined, the contact small but profound. There was no urgency now, no racing pulse of withheld desire. Only a slow, deliberate closeness that spoke louder than any words could. Her hand fit in mine like it had always belonged there, warm and reassuring. "I'm glad," she murmured, her voice soft, almost lost in the quiet hum of the apartment. Her head tilted slightly, and before I could respond, she leaned into me, resting her forehead against mine. The pressure was gentle, intimate, and completely grounding. Every tension, every hesitation melted away. I closed my eyes and let the moment take over. The subtle scent of her hair, the warmth of her body pressed to mine, the small, quiet sighs that punctuated the silence. The age gap that had seemed so daunting now felt irrelevant. Nothing about this, our closeness, our understanding, our choice to be together, was defined by numbers. It was defined by heartbeats, by unspoken confessions, by trust. "Do you really mean this?" she whispered after a long pause, breath brushing against my lips. I smiled softly, brushing my thumb along the back of her hand. "More than anything," I admitted. "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled in return, a mixture of relief and quiet joy, and we simply stood like that for a while, holding on to each other. The room around us didn't matter. The world outside, the judgments we imagined, the doubts, they all faded. Here, together, we had our clarity, our choice, our shared truth. Finally, she laughed softly, a small, delighted sound that made my chest ache with warmth. "So, we're really doing this?" "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "We are. No more pretending. No more waiting." She leaned back just enough to look up at me, eyes sparkling with everything words could never convey. I cupped her face lightly, pressing my forehead to hers again. And in that simple, unhurried touch, we said more than any confession could. We were together. Fully, undeniably, humanly together. We sank onto the couch at last, side by side, hands still entwined, a shared warmth bridging every hesitation that had come before. Nothing had to be perfect. Nothing had to be rushed. Just this, us, together, quietly triumphant in the aftermath of tension, desire, and slow-burn understanding. And as we settled, the room glowing softly around us, I realized that this connection, this moment, this choice, was more than I could have hoped for. More than I had imagined. And finally, more than enough.